Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Spiritual Infinities. Today's meeting's got a lovely guest, Barbara Hamfield. I hope I pronounced that right. And she's going to be talking about her journey today. And she is in North Carolina. And as you know, I'm in London. And I know everybody's all over the world listening to these podcasts. So enjoy. So, Barbara, hello, and welcome to Spiritual Infinity.
Thank you, Zenzi. I appreciate the opportunity. I always love talking about spirituality. I think it's the most important thing to be addressing in these days.
Yeah, so much. Yeah, very much so, because of the time we're living in, and we need to reconnect and remember who we are.
For sure. Absolutely.
So, Barbara, tell us your story, how you connected, how you first connected to your spirituality, what made you, what circumstances. Let's hear your story.
Well, I grew up on a farm in rural Nebraska, a very religious family, very conservative family. We went to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. And unless we were on our deathbed, we were in church. My grandfather used to say, God told me. And it's like, wow, like I wish God would tell me something. He doesn't tell me anything. And we used to have revival meetings every spring and every fall. There would be a guest pastor that would come in and preach. And then there would be what was called an altar call, where you could go to the altar and you could pray to God. And as a young child, I would go every spring and every fall and cry my eyes out about, I want God to speak to me like he does to my grandfather. And it never happened. And I was in college and I met a man who was going to seminary to become a pastor. So I thought, if I can't be close to God, maybe if I marry somebody who's close to God, maybe that will help.
All right.
So I married a man who was very close to God, who had a big family, and they prayed together and did all kinds of things. And I thought it was just really wonderful. We were married, and we actually worked for a religious organization in India. And while we were there for 5 years. And while we were there, we adopted 3 orphan children, ages 2, 3, and 4. One came from Mother Teresa's orphanage, and she had special needs. And we moved back to New York City. And my husband worked for a nonprofit and didn't make enough money to pay for living expenses in New York. So I wanted to bring in money for the family, but I wanted my children to be my top priorities. So I decided that the best way to do that would be to find a problem in the world that I could solve that other people would pay me for. So in order to do that, I sat on the playground. I'd take my children to the playground and I would just listen to conversations. And I began to hear people talking about clutter, about disorganization, about not filing their taxes because they couldn't find the receipts, or not having company over because the dining room table was full of papers, or fighting with their children or their spouse about clutter and disorganization. And I thought, they didn't have my mother and father. I mean, now, first of all, people often think that because I'm 78 years old, and I have been in the organizing industry for 47 years, and people think, oh, well, you're just naturally organized. No, that is not true. Nothing could be farther from the truth. You mentioned that your son has ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD in my 40s. And I'm a musician by training. I love to start things. I don't like to finish them. I like the big picture and I don't like details. So I can make a mess faster than anybody. But I was blessed to grow up in a family where my father was a farmer. So if you're a farmer and you want the cows to give milk and you want the crops to grow, you have to have systems, otherwise it doesn't work. And my mother was the assistant to the owner of a bank for 46 years. And they always won awards for how their customer service and things like that. So I grew up in a family where systems were the way you did things. And I thought everybody was that way. Well, when I became a mother with young children and I would go to other people's houses, I'd realize, wow, they didn't have my mother. And so I took $7 out of the grocery money, which was a big deal because I used to walk 20 blocks because I didn't have 50 cents for the bus. And I wrote an ad in a New York City newspaper that says, disorganized, I organize closets, files, kitchens, you name it, call Barbara Hemphill. I got 2 crank calls from men trying to pick me up. And the third call was from a 55-year-old woman whose husband was a solo practitioner attorney. He died suddenly and left piles of paper everywhere. And they didn't have any children. So in some ways, I did what a daughter might have done. She didn't know that she was my first client, and I didn't tell her. But I went into her home office, his home office, and just looked at mounds of papers. And first thinking, what have I done? And then I thought, okay, I just need to do what I know to do. So I started sorting, and that launched a business which grew in many, many different ways. It still exists now. It's called, the company now is called Productive Environment Institute. And I learned very quickly that the number one organizing challenge was paper, that we could do the closets and the cupboards and the kitchens and the storage rooms and the garage. But in those storage places, there were often boxes of paper, files from past lives and past careers and things like that. So, and people would ask me, how long do you keep? How long do you keep credit card receipts? How long do you keep real estate records? How long do you keep insurance policies? I didn't have an answer, but I thought there must be a book about that. And so I went to the library and discovered, much to my amazement, that there wasn't. And I thought, this is amazing, because it doesn't matter if you earn $18,000 or $800,000 a year, you still need to know the answer to this question. So in 1988, I wrote a book called Taming the Paper Tiger, and it addressed every single piece of paper that comes into the household. And to promote my business, I would speak at church groups and garden clubs and parent-teacher associations, anybody who would listen to me. And then as we moved into, I was in New York for a few months, and then we moved to Washington, D.C., and I went there and I reached out to the Small Business Administration, which in America is a resource that a business owner can go to get help. And so I went to them in Washington, D.C. and said I would like some help starting my organizing business. And I was told that that was a crazy idea, that it wasn't a good business idea, that nobody was going to pay for organizing closets, cupboards, and kitchens. Fortunately, I didn't believe them, and I went ahead with doing it. And recently, a study showed that residential organizing in America now is an 11.8 billion with a B dollar industry. So that $7 ad was one of the launching factors for that business. So as the business grew, I learned, well, we moved then into the digital age. So I renamed the company because I didn't want people to think that all I was helping people with was paper. So that was when the company was renamed Productive Environment Institute. And I helped launch the National Association for Organizing Consultants, and created a training program to train other people to do what I did. One of the things I learned early on was that and my business has been based on 4 words: clutter is postponed decisions. Yeah. I learned that from clothes closets. If your clothes closet is full of clothes and you don't have room to put in today's dry cleaning, It's because you haven't decided whether you're going to lose the 10 pounds to get into your favorite pair of pants again, or whether you're ever going to use the exercise equipment that looks so good on Home Shopping Network, or what to do with the candlesticks that you got from Aunt Sally, and you love Aunt Sally, but those candlesticks are not really your style. But if she came for Thanksgiving dinner, she would be so happy if they were on the dining room table. So then I realized the same thing was true of paper. I mean, that every piece of paper represented a decision.
Yeah, it's true.
And then it's also true of digital. So if you're in your email, so there are so many people that wake up in the morning, often before they even get out of bed, open up their phone, look at their email, and open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close, but they don't do anything. And at the end of 45 minutes, all they're feeling is more depressed and nothing really has happened. And I also found that letting go, people had so much clutter, and I define clutter as anything that prevents you from accomplishing your work and enjoying your life. So clutter comes in many forms. There's certainly physical clutter. There's clutter in your closets, in your kitchen, and on your desk, and in your garage, and maybe even in your car. And then there's clutter in your email inbox and on your digital documents and your photographs. We're getting ready to do a webinar recently coming up called Picture Palooza, which is organizing digital photographs, which is a big issue for people. But what I learned was from working with literally thousands of people one-on-one is that when people are having trouble letting go of something, whether it's a piece of paper or something in their closet, it is because of an emotional issue. And that if I ask enough questions, I would always find out that something had happened to them at some point in their life. I was autographing books at Barnes & Noble in New York City, and I told that story. And a young man in his early 20s came up and he said, you said that when you have trouble letting go, he said, my apartment is full of clutter, much of it paper. He said, I'm in a little studio apartment. I haven't had anybody in it for months, including my family, because I'm too embarrassed. And he said, I come home from work at night and I say, okay, tonight is the night I'm going to clean up this mess. And he said, I physically pick up the papers and I become paralyzed. And he said, there are nights, he said, I sort on my bed because it's a small apartment and the bed is the biggest flat space. He said, there are nights when I literally shove the papers in the bed and crawl into bed with my papers. And then he looked at me and he said, my mother died when I was 6. Are you telling me I have to deal with the grief of losing my mother before I can organize my paper? And I said, well, I'm not a mental health professional, so I can't answer that question. But what I can tell you from my experience is that if you find someone you trust, probably not a family member, sometimes a family member, but not usually. If you find someone that you trust that can help you decide, remember, clutter is postponed decisions. So you need a facilitator to help you decide what you want and need to keep. It will solve your paper problems. And based on my experience, it will impact your decision-making about everything else in your life. Because papers represent your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your expectations. So I told that story. I was speaking to 700 executive women at a college, and I told that story. And a woman in her 40s came up to me and she said, she said, you saved my marriage. I said, wow, that's pretty dramatic. Do you mind explaining? And she said, I came here with the intention of telling my husband, to whom I've been married for 13 years, that I was leaving because he's a pack rat and I have allergies and all the stuff around the house. I just can't get rid of the dust and I can't stand it. And then she stopped and the tears started coming down her face. And she said, I never understood until I heard you that it wasn't that he wouldn't let go, but that he couldn't let go. His mother died when he was 7 years old. I said, may I make a suggestion? And she said, yes. And I said, go home and say something to the effect of, I never understood before how important all this is to you. Let's figure out how we can keep it and still live together. She didn't hire me, but I followed her for like 8 months, and it made all the difference in the world. And I hope that if someone listening to this is living with someone that is hanging on, and I think God has a sense of humor. Most of us are married or connected with somebody else who has exactly the opposite approach. I'm certainly been married for 38 years to someone who could care less about being disorganized and doesn't even know what clutter is. But if you try to tell that person, in fact, I can't tell you how many books I have not sold because I will be speaking at an event. My books will be at the back of the room and people will be buying them. And somebody will come up and say, I'm buying this for my wife or my husband. And I'll say, I won't sell it to you, because not only will it not help the problem, it will make the problem worse. It will become another source of clutter. And worse than that, it will become more divisive between the two of you, because people have to want to get over the problem. And the more somebody else tells them, the harder it gets.
You see me nodding my head and saying yes. What you said is so interesting, because at the end of the day, people can come and hear you and can come and hear anybody, myself, and it will click with them, and they're looking at somebody else. But if that person doesn't want to, is not in that space or not in that place ready to take that action, they're not going to do it.
That's so true. And the reason that I was excited about being on your podcast is that I wrote a book called Less Clutter, More Life. And the premise is that physical and digital clutter is a symptom of emotional and spiritual clutter. And there was a study that just came out from Harvard about the way people are using AI.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read the results, I about fell off my chair, because it said the number one way people are using AI is for therapy and companionship. And the number 2 way is organizing my life. And you had mentioned, Zenzi, when we were talking before, that you felt like spiritual counselors, people that are in that area, that this is our time. And that's exactly right. And that's the reason it's our time, because what I have found through the years, without exception, is that when people are having trouble getting organized, when they're having trouble letting go of their clutter, it is because they are not connected with their creator.
Yeah. They are looking for something which then they don't know what. They're looking for something to guide them. They're looking for something that they can lean on, that they feel will listen to them. They're looking for a solution that they can trust.
Absolutely. That is exactly right. And here's the interesting thing, because my passion is clutter. I mean, people will say to me, you're 78 years old, why aren't you retiring? I said, I'm not retiring, I'm refiring.
Thank you. I don't believe in retirement. Well, depends on where you're at. But you're like me. Well done. You refire and you keep going, because you find a cause, you find a reason for living and keep doing and helping, sharing.
Well, yeah. And what's interesting is how many people, so when we help people get rid of clutter, we have a 5-step process that we use. And the first step is state your vision. And Zenzi, I can't tell you how many people during the years have said, I don't really have a vision. And when somebody says that, I know they are a prospect for the service that we offer, because one of the ways that you find your purpose is by eliminating the clutter. I have seen it happen over and over. And the clutter can be physical clutter. People have no idea when people are buried in physical clutter. They have no idea the spiritual price they are paying for that clutter. They just don't. And when the phrase, like we go into companies, we actually go into companies and do something called a productivity party, or when we do it with health people, we call it a healthy office detox. Or if we do it in government, we call it a productive environment day. So it depends on where we do it, what we call it. But basically, all it is having a one-day event where everybody is clearing clutter. And what happens without exception is employees will say, oh, I have real work to do today, and I don't want to throw anything. Yeah. And I'll say, how many? We start the day with a seminar called Sometimes It Takes an Expert to Take Out the Trash. And I'll say, how many of you left home with more clutter around than you prefer? Well, 50% will raise their hands. Statistically, it's probably true of 80%.
Yes.
And so I will say, everything we're going to talk about today applies at home. But then to your earlier point, Zenzi, they're going to immediately think about what they're going to tell their significant other. So one of the things we do is we make them raise their right hand and take a pledge that they're going to listen for what they're going to do, not what they're going to tell somebody else to do. And that, of course, makes them laugh. One of the things that happens every single time, we'll be into it about 2 hours, and people say, oh, this feels, and these are the exact words I have heard hundreds of times, this feels so much lighter.
Yes.
So when people begin to get rid of the physical clutter, the digital clutter, the email clutter, the clutter in their brain that says, I'm too old to do this. I'm too stupid to do this. It's too late to do this. My husband would never let me do this. This will never work. Nobody's going to pay for this. Nobody's going to read this book. That's all spiritual clutter. I mean, that's all mental clutter.
Mental clutter, yeah.
But what helps you let go of that is saying, I want to connect with my purpose. And so you can focus on what you can do. Because what I've seen over and over is people will have a lot of clutter, and there are some things they don't know what to do with. So because of that, they don't do anything. Mm-hmm. And so what we say is, the question I will ask people hundreds of times in coaching is, what's the next action? Because what happens is people think of 20 actions or 30 actions or 50 actions, and they don't do anything. But we can only do one step at a time. And when we take that one step, we eliminate the clutter. And as we eliminate the clutter, we reveal our purpose for which we were created. And then we get refired.
I need to stop you there. What you said is so amazing. But what I want to ask you is that what you said is amazing. What made you come to the realization of clutter, which you recognized earlier on is what people needed, and the realization with the spiritual effect that clutter in your life has on your spirituality? What was the process that realization came together?
Well, when I first started as an organizing consultant, I didn't talk about my spirituality with anyone. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want to offend anybody, because I had a lot of people who believed differently than I did. And because my grandfather was very offensive about his belief, I didn't want to be offensive like he was. Mm-hmm. But when I would sit in my car, because in the early days, now we do all our organizing or almost all of it virtually, but back in those days, I would physically go places, and I would sit in my car and pray that the people that I was with would feel God's love for them, whether I ever mentioned his name.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't mention his name because I didn't want to offend them. But I knew in my heart of hearts that connecting with God was one of the critical factors in that point. But then I began to get braver about sharing my own faith and my own walk and my own vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize that that's what people really, really seeking. And now we do a program called Soar to Success. And close to 80% of the people that join the program, and the purpose of the program is to help them organize their physical and digital information. That's what Soar to Success is. But a large percentage of people join it because throughout our training, we talk about the spiritual connection to it, because there is a spiritual connection to every single thing we do.
Yeah. You are that I do know. I know everything we do, and the things that happen in our life. There is always a spiritual connection, because as the beings that we are, and we're an extension of the Creator, our life is supposed to be happy, joyful, cooperative. When I say cooperative, share with one another. But because of the decisions we made, it's not turning out. And that's because we became disconnected. And therefore, when we have decisions to make, because we're disconnected, we're not connecting to our source to make those decisions, to have the life and create the life that we and others around us are supposed to have.
That's exactly right. And you used a word that I love, which is joyful. And I want to push back a little bit to one thing you said, because you said happy or joyful. And I think one of the things that I have learned that's been very poignant for me is that I can be joyful when I'm not happy. Because joyful to me means knowing, believing, I believe God says, I know the plans I have for you, plans for good and not evil.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that's happening to me, I know I'm learning from it. So whatever fail, and as an entrepreneur, I've made every mistake you could possibly, in 47 years, every mistake you could make as an entrepreneur. I've made them all at least once, and some of them multiple times. But I've always believed that God had a plan. I mean, the reason that I tried to commit suicide at age 11. I was in a mental hospital at 40 for being suicidal. So I've picked myself up many times. And the reason that I did because I believe deep in my heart that I was created for a purpose. So during those times, I could be joyful, but I wasn't happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you said something, and I don't really want to go into too deep, but you've just mentioned that at 11 you were suicidal, at 40 you were suicidal. What was it that made you feel that way? Because there's a lot of people around that are going through, have been through, and so, what is it that got you there, and what got you out, and that process?
So it's practically the most important question, actually. So what got me there at age 11? It was because I didn't hear from God, and also because I went to a one-room country school from kindergarten through 9. There were 30 children and one student, and I was bullied. So for 9 years, I was bullied, and I just felt so desperately alone. So I didn't feel connected to God because he didn't talk to me like he talked to my grandfather. So that meant I wasn't, and all the kids beat me up at school. So and my mother worked, which meant I was home, and I had one brother, but he was 6 years younger than I. So for all practical purposes, I was an only child, alone in the second floor of a tenant farmhouse, and I was desperately lonely. And at one point, I just decided it wasn't worth it. And so I put a dry cleaning bag over my head. And unfortunately, my brother came in and found me. And if it hadn't been for him, I probably would have died. And then at 40, it was because I mentioned early on that I married a man who was going to seminary. I was married to him for 14 years and he divorced me. And so when he divorced me, that was like God. I married him to be close to God, and he divorced me. So it was at that point, I didn't know what the unforgivable sin was, but I thought I must have committed it because that's the only way this man of God would leave me. And he did. And so I went through a very, very deep depression at that point. But then and you ask what got me out of it, and what got me out of it were friends and spiritual coaches to help me understand that there were some deep hurts that I needed to work through. And I think we all, everybody does. Everybody has a story. I don't care. And one of the things you learn when you're an organizing consultant or when you're a coach, as you are, there are things about the people that nobody else in the world knows.
No.
And they need to feel safe to talk to you about it. And but then now, something I'd never used to do was now I can share my spirituality because it's what saved me. So it's like what you teach is what you've learned. And I learned that it saved me. And now probably 80% of the people that come into our Sort of Success program come because we talk about spirituality when we're talking about paper and email.
Hence, the spirituality is so important. And this is why I'm saying to people, and which you brought out so beautifully in what you've done with this clutter, that you've been able to identify our clutter is connected to an unhappiness within our life that we don't even realize. And our unhappiness comes out in different ways that we don't realize. And hence, when we talk about our issues, when we talk about our pain, it's helpful to others to see that we can overcome it. And it is always, I was going to say genuinely, it's not generally, it's always become disconnected from our source, and we need to reconnect to that power, to God, the creator, whatever name is one of all creation. And when we're connected to that, we have something that we can hold on to, that we can talk to. As you said, you felt that God wasn't there for you. Your grandfather was also saying God said, and you wanted that connection with God. You wanted that talk, that conversation, and you were looking for that all the time. And it comes in different ways and different forms. But we have to go through in order to see and understand. Barbara, your journey in this, and it is a spiritual one, as it started, and this is another thing I want to say to people, is that how God connects us or shows us what our, not the journey, but what our purpose is, comes in different ways and different forms. Barbara, in this, you're traveling and in your business and with working with people with clutter, when you've worked with people, could be a group one-to-one, and I know you've done this, you've actually helped people probably to identify what their purpose is. How do they relate to you? What is their reaction?
Well, their reaction is like shock. I never thought about it. I never thought that. And I think about one of my favorite stories is a friend of mine that I'd known for many years had always talked about her disorganized office. And she got a new job, and she was working from home. So she was still going to be working in the same office, but a new office. And I said to her, I would like to gift you 4 hours of my service to help you organize your office before you start your new job. That would be your congratulations to celebrate this wonderful new opportunity. And she said, she said, you can't come to my office. I'd just die if you saw my office. And I said, well, you don't have to, I don't have to see your office. I said, put your papers in a box and bring them to my office. So she came to my office with 2 boxes full of papers that had been on her desk. And I started showing her, we have a proprietary way that we organize papers in what we call the finding system, as opposed to the filing system. And about 2 hours into it, she was ecstatic. She was so excited. And I said, I have a question for you. I said, I'm really curious. I said, why were you so reticent to accept my offer of helping you get organized? And she said, because I hired 3 organizers in 2 states and paid over $10,000 and was worse off than when I started. And so I said, so I'm curious, what's different about what we did than what you did with the previous organizers? And she said 2 things. One, I never realized that my piles of paper were postponed decisions. And 2, she said, you never said to me, this is what you should do. You ask me, what are you willing to do? Because we call it the art of organizing. And the word art has special meaning because one of the things I learned early on with piles of paper, we said there's only 3 things you can do with any piece of paper or any email or any digital document. You can either act on it, you can put it away for reference, or you can toss it. So the art of organizing, we call it, we soar to success. Soar is systemize all the ways that information comes into you and organize it into action or reference.
That's so interesting. That is so interesting. So what I like, the key word is that the postponed decisions, which it is another way of procrastination, and not realizing that all the clutter, although you go into people's home, you see so much of they're hanging on, they're not sure, and they're hanging on. But when you brought out that, let go of what you don't need, let go of what doesn't serve you, and you're making room for other things that may need to come in that does serve you.
Absolutely.
Because if you're so packed up with rubbish and you want, how can I put, you want good things to come in, if there's so much rubbish, those good things will get hidden in with the rubbish, and you won't be able to deal with it, handle it in the way you should do. So you need to declutter, make space for the air to breathe, things to come in so that you can see and enjoy and make those decisions.
Exactly right. That is exactly right. It's clearing the clutter so you can accomplish your work and enjoy your life and be all that God created you to be and do.
So much so. So much so. So, Barbara, how would you, if you're taking it solely from a spiritual perspective, what would you say to people? Because it took you time really to come into that side, because you didn't want to offend anybody, and quite rightly so, because it took me ages to say I'm a spiritual coach.
Mm-hmm.
So from the spiritual perspective, how would you start to encourage somebody and make them realize that this is because you're searching for something much deeper that you're not sure of, but here it is?
Well, it's different with every person. And just like you said, I'm led, you're led. And so the answer you would give is going to be different depending on who you're sitting in front of. So, but the one question that I use over and over that has been extremely helpful, and I've used it myself. I'm a big believer in practicing what I preach. So Everything that I teach other people are things that I have learned through experience. And one of the questions that I ask people is, in fact, we have a scorecard, which I can give you a link that people can fill it out. And the last question on the scorecard is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy am I with my life? And when somebody gives me a low score on that, if they give me a high score, it's like I'm really excited to have them be a client, because I know that all they need is a system. They're basically happy with life. It's just that no one's ever showed it. And they didn't have my mother. Nobody teaches us to do it in school. And so if somebody's happy with their life, but they've got lots of clutter, it's like, that's not a problem, man. We can fix that in very, very short period of time. Very short period of time. If they answer with a very low score, my first question is, tell me more about that. And the question I ask is, if you were to leave this earth tonight, what regret would you have? The answer to that question, Zenzi, is a form of clutter. Because whatever we believe in our heart is something that we should do or wish we'd had done or whatever, and we're not doing anything about it, that is preventing us from accomplishing your work and enjoying your life. So I'll tell you a very personal story about that. I asked myself that question. This has been a year ago, January. And the answer, and it was because of a course I took from somebody else who taught me to ask that question. And I said, well, I have one of my daughters. We don't have a bad relationship. We just don't have one. And she lives across the United States from me. And I've reached out to her, but she never reaches back. And, there's nothing I could do about it. And he challenged me and said, that's a lie. There's always something you can do. So I thought about it. And that was in January. And in the US, May is Mother's Day. So I said, okay, if I have not made a connection with my daughter by Mother's Day, I'm going to get on an airplane and show up on her doorstep on Mother's Day. Well, we connected much before that, and there's a lesson there, and it's about we define, my company's Productive Environment Institute, and we define productive environment as an intentional setting in which you can accomplish your work and enjoy your life. That intention of saying, I am going to connect with my daughter, actually made it happen. So that's one of the ways. There are many other ways as well, but that's one really good way to connect with what the spiritual disconnect is.
Yeah. Yes, I know that one, because when you actually say this, it's like you're giving the command and the universe has to follow it. So it's watching what we say, believing in it, and taking action. But of course, connecting to that source so that we can have the right intention, the right thought to take that action, which will bring the results that are joyful to everybody and in balance and in harmony for everybody.
Exactly.
Barbara, this has been wonderful. It's been an eye-opener. Before I say goodbye and thank you, what gold nugget would you like to leave for those people listening to our podcast?
If you are someone who has papers in your life, whether they're boxes of paper from previous careers, whether they're notebooks and books from going from higher education, whether it's memorabilia from your children or your grandchildren or from your own life, I can absolutely assure you that if you will organize the physical paper in your life so that you don't leave a mess for your children or grandchildren, it will impact every other area of your life, because in order to deal with the paper, you will become skilled at decision making. And when you're skilled at decision making around paper, that skill will roll over into everything else.
Barbara, thank you for that. That nugget, I will take that on board. As you said, when you can be skilled at organizing your paper, making the decisions, letting go. And as you said, with its higher education, lower education, and I've got that in my life. And this talk with you has made my eyes open to a lot of things. Although you hear it before and you say, okay. And now having you confront and say it is like, yes, I can tell you I am going away and taking more effort to get rid of things in my life. And thank you for that saying where it's, it's decisions, it's lack of decisions. Thank you so much. And I really mean that. And I'm sure those who are watching today have learned a lot. And before I say goodbye, how can people connect with you? How can people reach out to you? How can people look at your programs and get to know you? Please say it.
You can go to productiveenvironmentscore.com. And if you go there, it'll take you less than 5 minutes to get your productivity score, which will talk about how productive you are when it comes to managing your paper and your email and your projects and your to-do lists. And then that will also give you an immediate template, a picture of what an organized office looks like. And we have something called the Magic 7. And so once you fill that score out, you'll get that picture, and it will give you a template. It includes something called the art of wastebasketry, which is questions that you can ask to decide what you really need to keep. So just go to productiveenvironmentscore.com.
You can see me go like this. I'm going to that.
I'm gonna watch for your scores, Zenzi.
I need it. Barbara, thank you so much, and bless you. And to all those who are looking at this podcast, I know you've had an eye opener today, and this is something. It didn't just go like this. It was like, and I loved the way you went through with your paperwork, and then I had to take my and think, my gosh. And it's the way of us seeing that our disconnection from source comes through our lives in different ways, and it's all there, but we don't see it, we don't know it until we have somebody like Barbara who's gone through that to come and say, this is what I went through. And I know some of you are going to say, my gosh, it's affecting me too. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast as much as I have. Barbara, thank you so much. And to everybody out there, thank you, and have a great week.
Thank you, Zenzi. I appreciate our interview so much. I really appreciate your approach to life, and blessings on you and all the people that you coach.
Thank you so much to everybody. Bye for now.